sideways. The cafe served strong coffee in tiny delicate cups. The caffeine content alone had his heart racing, and Brill wondered why it didn't eat through the delicate aged paper-thin porcelain. He took a small sip of his third cup and listened to the thudding beat of his heart accelerate. It made him smile. Constant training, running 80 miles or more per week, and daily meditation kept his normal heart rate in the low range, but add a jolt of Java to his system and it took off like a jackrabbit jumping. He was waiting for a man to join him. Not at the table, but in the cafe itself. The man was late, which was why he was on his third cup. It pissed him off just a little. He had learned long ago to just go with the flow, and his laid-back attitude developed in a surf van life on the coastal wilderness of South Africa was at odds with his look. Buzz-cut hair, sharp jawline, sharp cheeks, and a plain face that was completely forgettable except under the most extreme circumstances. He looked like he was former military and carried himself with discipline. It showed in the precision with which he lifted the tiny cup from the saucer, from the eyes that never stopped roaming, taking in detail after detail of his surroundings. "Another, sir?" the waiter asked with a strong accent. Brill waved him off. One more and his heart might explode. After he was finished, he planned to hole up in the safe house and do a movie binge while running the treadmill, just to run off some of the energy. It was a habit he had developed in South Africa before joining the Recce, the Special Forces of the South African Defense Force. He needed a special dispensation and dual citizenship, both documents made simple with a call from a cabinet member Brill was happy to call friend. The habit probably kept him alive, he thought. He worked to keep his mind from wandering on the wonders of running, and was mostly successful. The appearance of Avi Goldstein brought him right into focus. The Israeli expat was short with curly black hair that ran from his head down to his chest and arms. Every exposed inch was curly black hair, and the arms dealer liked to wear his custom-made shirts with almost all the buttons undone. The fabric stretched over his expansive stomach, which exposed even more of the hirsute chest. "Booby," Avi embraced the waitress. His hand wandered down her back and across her buttocks. Brill watched her face blanch in disgust before she hid it behind a beaming smile. Avi was a big tipper, he knew from observation, and the waitress his regular. She would put up with a lot for what he would put on his American Express black card. "Right on time," he whispered as Avi shouted out his order. Brill could almost repeat it with him. "Café au lait, Perrier and Estella." Brill's lips moved as the Israeli ordered. The man settled into his chair and pulled out a small cell phone. He slid through a number and started talking into it. The waitress brought his order on a silver tray and set it in front of him. He patted her on the small of her back and let his hand slide down lower. She smiled and extracted herself with a little grace. Brill was impressed. Avi was meeting Bashar al-Assad, a terrorist leader of the Lions of Arabia, in the cafe in Athens for the express purpose of selling him an arms package of used Soviet weapons from a warehouse in Belarus. How Avi was connected to Belarus mafia was a dot for someone else to connect. As was why Mossad allowed him to operate for so long unimpeded. Brill suspected that the arms sold to the terrorist were used to overthrow or destabilize other governments in the Middle East, which took pressure off the Jewish nation clinging precariously to land on the edge of the Mediterranean. His instructs back in Virginia had suggested he read about history and geography, and Brill had planned out a course of study. It had yet to touch on the politics of the region where he found himself operating, as of late. His specialty was Africa. But politics in the desert seemed pretty much the same as the jungle or even the civilized shore of America. People struggled to get what they wanted and have their way, and damn the consequences or innocent bystanders. A black armored Mercedes rolled up to the sidewalk entrance to the cafe and disgorged two bodyguards, giant hulking men with black hair and dark glasses. They were fat over muscle, giant bellies overlapping their belts, and relied on size instead of speed. Brill knew there was a third guard in the back seat of the car who covered Bashar's back as he exited, and lay in wait just in case he was needed. The man himself stood up from the vehicle and stretched in the sunlight. He was lean and hard-looking, a patron of the desert sun that tanned his skin into a leathery sheen. He had 3 fingers on his left hand from a small bomb explosion as he built a suicide vest, and scars along that same cheek and side of his face. It was hidden now behind black sunglasses that matched the bodyguards. Brill watched him walk over to Avi and embrace the man, kissing both cheeks as was custom. He wanted to marvel at the action, since an Arab man sworn to remove Israel from the map was expressing affection to a Jewish arms dealer. This proved to Brill that circumstance not only made strange bedfellows, that if the bad men in the world would stop trying to put one over on the rest of society, everyone could all pretty much get along. Common goals meant common sense should take over. On the other hand, hatreds ran pretty deep, and Brill knew a thing about rage. It was a potent fuel to get a mission accomplished, one he tapped into himself often. Bashar sat across from Avi and accepted the coffee and water. Avi nursed the bottle of beer as the two men began to negotiate. Showtime, thought Brill, and stood up. He pulled a couple of coins out of his pocket and left enough on the table to cover Avi's bill and tip for the waitress. With his back to the bodyguards, he lit 2 small M80 firecrackers from his pocket and rolled them under the tables toward the road. Each firecracker had a 10-second fuse, so he counted down from 9 as he pulled a Glock 19 from the waist of his pants. He didn't need to rack the slide or check the chamber, because he had done it a dozen times in the hotel room and on the way to the cafe. The M80's explosion echoed up the narrow stone streets, the sound bouncing off the walls to amplify the effect. The 2 bodyguards by the car jumped and flinched. They spread out and pulled pistols from shoulder holsters and searched for the source of the sound. Brill marched across the 20 feet of the cafe toward Avi. He raised his gun and sent 2 shots through the man's heart. He shifted the gun to the closest bodyguard and dropped him with a round to the forehead and repeated the action to the second man. Bashar screamed and cowered under the table, mewling in fear. Brill didn't have him on his list, but the man was a terrorist and killer. The world would be a better place without him, so he took a shot and drilled him through the nose with a hollow point. Another man screamed in the new silence. The backseat bodyguard scrambled out of the car, still yelling as he fumbled for his pistol. Brill dropped him with a round to the chest and a second to the head just to be sure. He bent over, grabbed Avi's phone and attaché, and walked calmly away from the crying and befuddled patrons of the cafe, 20 seconds after he stood up from his table. Chapter 2. This is a secure line, the voice announced after 3 rings. Shadowboxer, said Brill. Mission confirmed. Mission confirmed, Shadowboxer. Stand by for secondary assignment. The call connected him through a series of clicks and buzzing as his brow wrinkled in confusion. This wasn't protocol. After a mission, he was to hide in the safe house for a week, then extract under a false identity. A second mission on the heels of the first meant something had gone wrong. He replayed the hit in his head. Avi was gone for sure. 2 hollow points to the heart don't leave much muscle to work with unless they put the man on a bypass machine in the first 3 minutes. Bashar was in the same condition. He slowed it down and relived the 20 seconds or so it took to happen, and tried to remember if something wasn't consistent, if it didn't fit the pattern. Nope, his hit was confirmed. They were dead men. Then what was the second mission, he wondered. The call clicked through and a new voice picked up. It wasn't his normal handler. Brill, breathed Shelby in his velvet southern voice. Brill stood at attention. Sir. Call me Shelby, son. After what we've been through together, we can accept a little familiarity, despite the formality of our roles. Shelby Johnson was a lame duck senator from his home state, and the man who introduced him to Africa. He was also the chairman of Barak, the defense contract company Brill was currently doing off-books black operations on the European continent before. Shelby, said Brill. This is against protocol. He was right. There were layers in place designed to protect the head of the company from the actions of its operators, and talking on a transcontinental line was breaking all sorts of rules. Some might argue it made the chairman an accessory to the murders Brill just committed, though the legal team assembled by the senator could probably justify a simple conversation. Sometimes you just have to look at the rules and say fudge em, grunted the senator. I want to tell you, that was mighty fine work you did. People noticed, and it helped our position greatly. Brill felt a small swelling of pride and hated himself for it. His own father had never dispensed praise when he was growing up, so compliments coming from senior males tended to touch his ego. He didn't like that anyone had that power over him. That man was competing with us for a contract, continued the senator, and playing against our national interests. Now Barak can move in and take over. It took a moment for Brill to register what the man said. "We're doing the deal, sir?" "Shelby," corrected the senator. "Yes, son, we're controlling the deal. U.S. products supporting our side in this little disagreement." Brill sighed softly. U.S. policy allowed defense contractors to sell weapons to rebel groups and support national interest overseas. Brill had been on the opposite end of that agreement when Barack and companies like it armed rebel groups had kidnapped him and his girlfriend when they were volunteering at a refugee camp. Refugees created by those U.S. products. The rebels raped them both and killed his girlfriend before Brill was rescued by a mercenary company. They too fought against U.S. armed rebel groups and militias on the subcontinent, a trend that continued when he joined the South African Defense Force. This web of deceit bothered him, but since he was unsure what to do about it, and working with Barack allowed him a lot of latitude to remove bad players from the field, he would put off thinking about it until some point in the future. Right now, he got to kill bad guys and that was enough for him. "We got a problem, and we're doing a favor for a friend," said Shelby. "There's a little argument down in Syria right now that we're not a part of, but a senator's daughter got caught up in the middle." "What's the favor?" asked Brill. "I wanted you especially for this one, son, 'cause I know it's close to your heart. The girl and her boyfriend were scooped up by a rebel group. I need you to go in and get them out." Rage blossomed in his belly like a mushroom cloud, and blood pounded in his temple. Another rebel group harming another innocent girl. Damn right Shelby wanted to send him in. And since he didn't say anything to the contrary, there were no orders not to kill them all. "When do I leave?" he growled into the phone. "We've got a plane waiting for you at the airport," said Shelby. "I wanted to call you on this because this one is just between you, me and the senator, got it?" If he was caught, there wouldn't be help or anyone coming to his rescue. He was pretty sure a U.S. senator would be working official channels, but Brill suspected that he was part of a backdoor deal, a favor given for some future favor earned. It didn't matter. A young girl and her boyfriend were in trouble. When Brill was in trouble, a group of hard men came to his rescue. He owed one to the universe to try and pay it back. Chapter 3. A Gulfstream G-20 squatted on the runway like a sleek insect. It was painted matte black with golden trim and bore the logo of a fictitious oil exploration company. There wasn't, but the cover of the Canadian company would buy him time on the runway. He climbed up the set of stairs and settled into the cabin. A single flight attendant came out of the cockpit and shut the door. He watched as she pulled up the steps and locked them in place while the engines fired up on the plane. They were wasting no time, which was good. The longer the girl and her boyfriend were in rebel hands, the more damage that could occur. Brill wanted to be on the ground and gathering information so he could effect a rescue as fast as possible. "Would you like something to drink for the flight?" the attendant asked. She had flowing black hair and smoky black eyes that crinkled when she smiled. Brill still felt a little jittery from the coffee triple stack at the cafe, so he asked for a beer and for water. She brought a bottle of Perrier and Stella Artois, and he shook his head at the humor of the universe. The plane took off without incident, and when they reached cruising speed, the pilot reached back and opened his door. "Call for you," he passed a headset to the attendant. She brought it to Brill and showed him where to plug it into the seat. "Shadowboxer," he said into the microphone. "This is an unsecure line," the voice told him. "Stand by for instructions." "Roger that." "A package is waiting at the airport with your credentials and supplies. Look for the logo." The call disconnected. Shit, thought Brill. They didn't tell him the password. Chapter 4. The plane touched down with the gritty sound of rubber on tarmac as the wheels rolled over the sand-dusted runway. Brill unbuckled as they came to a step and met the attendant at the folded-down stairwell. "Enjoy our stay," she flashed a smile. Brill nodded back. He wondered briefly if she knew what kind of man she was transporting, or was she part of the network of operatives and support personnel working for Barack? Was the offer to enjoy ironic? Was it sincere? Her pretty smile suggested she meant what she said, but Brill knew better to trust appearances. He stepped out of the plane and into the musty heat. A lone battered pickup truck with a plywood bed waited for him. A man sat on the plywood with his legs crossed. He wore cast-off clothes under an open robe that billowed around him in the swirling wind. Brill glanced around. The airport was a private strip, far from the noise and clutter of a town. A mountain range smudged the horizon to the sound, and the ever-present wind left a gritty film on his skin. "This isn't Syria," he told the man as he approached the truck. Aslan hopped off the bed and opened the passenger door with a flourish. "Welcome to Turkey," he grunted in clear English. "I am Aslan." Brill paused before climbing in. "You have something for me." Aslan smiled under a bristling mustache and lifted the seat forward to reveal an oilskin-wrapped package. He placed it on the seat and moved around to the driver's side. Brill opened up the cloth. It was a Taurus 9, a heavy bulky pistol with 3 clips that held 15 rounds of ammunition. He quickly worked through the pistol, racking the slide and ejecting a 4th magazine. It needed to be cleaned, but it was serviceable. Aslan noticed the attention Brill paid to the action of the weapon and handed him a clean cloth. Brill grunted thanks and slid into the passenger seat. He began cleaning the weapon while Aslan drove them toward the smudge on the horizon. Chapter 5. "I will distract them," said Aslan, sensing the concern coming off of Brill. He almost asked how, but instead gave the driver a nod. "We are near a shallow gorge," Aslan continued. "Open your door and hide until I am gone. There is a trail beyond that you can follow once darkness falls. It will lead you across the border. Mark the entrance on the other side, for you must return on that same path." Brill glanced out of the passenger side window. At first he couldn't see the hiding hole in the craggy landscape. The land rippled and folded as it marched toward the mountains in a slow, steady rise. One dip about 10 feet away showed bare earth where a flood had eroded the soil. The shadows played funny across the escarpment. It must be the small gorge his contact was speaking about. Aslan passed him an oversized 2-way radio wrapped in a plastic wrap ball. "Hide this so that when you return I will come to this spot to meet you." Brill took the soccer ball-sized package, checked his weapon and a go-bag full of water, food and a first aid kit from the plane. He grabbed the door handle. "Stay low," Aslan warned. Brill rolled out of the door and hunched down. He scooted across the hard-scrabbled dirt and dipped into the depression. Aslan gunned the truck engine and shot toward the mountains. He lay on the horn, lights flashing as he raced a mile ahead. The truck slid to a stop, and he hopped out to shove a box off the wooden bed. He executed a K-turn on the dirt road and drove back in a dusty cloud of silence. He didn't slow as he passed Brill's hiding spot. From his vantage point, Brill watched a group of robed men descend from the mountain pass. 6 of them advanced on the box and opened it with victory cries. They held up bottles of vodka to show the 2 men who had stayed 100 yards behind as guards and lookouts. Members of the patrol shouldered the box, and the group disappeared back into the rocks. Outstanding, thought Brill. Aslan had ensured the men would be distracted as he made the crossing tonight. Now all he had to do was wait for dusk to make his way through. Chapter 6. Brill waited for twilight before he moved. He double-checked that the plastic-wrapped ball with a radio in the middle was secured under a small cairn of rocks, adjusted his pack, and took off down the trail. The wash of stars that lit up the darkening sky provided a soft white glow that made it easy to pick his way through the mountains, only stumbling occasionally. It took a few hours to top the rise and start descending. The path followed a gentle curve around an outcropping of stone, and Brill was thinking about a stop for water and fuel when he rounded the rock and froze. A young boy of 12 or 13 stood on the path holding a shepherd's crook. Behind him, a string of goats stretched across the trail in eerie silence. "Damn," muttered Brill as his hand trailed up to his waist to rest on the pistol grip. Why didn't the goats make any noise? Normally the animal bleats could be heard for hundreds of yards. He could have hidden off the path and let them pass, or free-climbed lower to go around. Goats in Africa had made plenty of noise, so much that his team learned to avoid them. The bleating cry of goats and cattle had betrayed more sneaking men than any sentry ever could. This mission was going sideways early, and all because he had been thinking about water. The boy watched him, eyes wide in the darkness, just as quiet as the animals he tended. Brill almost shot him, and thought perhaps he would, but he didn't have a silencer on the pistol. If he pulled out the weapon and began screwing it on the barrel, the boy would run, maybe scream and scatter the goats, which would set off noise that would carry in the dark. He didn't know what was out there. which meant he had to kill the boy. If he was part of the rebel camp, he would alert them of Brill's presence, and the mission would be compromised. If he belonged to a village nearby, it was the same outcome. Brill couldn't let him go because he was an unknown quantity. He started to draw the pistol, and the boy smiled. A boy. Young and full of potential, not yet hardened by the life that was waiting for him. He was going to turn rebel or get killed by bombing. He was going to lose family and friends, and even if he survived past the civil war that was tearing at his country, he would have to scratch out a meager existence on this dirt his people were so loyal to. But yet he smiled with the guile of a child, only slightly afraid of the grizzled man he ran into on a dark path just past twilight. Brill left the pistol in his waistband and slung his pack open. He twisted off a top of one of the bottles of water and held it out to the boy. After a few moments, the kid shuffled forward and reached for it with a tentative hand. Brill took a second bottle, opened it, and tilted it up. The boy smiled again and mimicked him, giggling as a trickle of liquid sloshed past his lip and dribbled down his chin. Brill tore off the end of a protein bar wrapper and passed it to the boy. This time he didn't need prompting, and started chowing down on the chewy sweet bar with gusto. Brill tried a smile. It must have worked because the boy smiled back, granola covering his teeth. They stood next to each other on the path, drinking water and snacking on protein bars for a few moments. Brill decided he couldn't kill a kid, even if it cost him the mission. The boy would probably tell, and that would bring hell down on him from who knew what. He'd deal with it when it happened, and if the boy came back with a Kalashnikov, that was his choice. But not on this path, not on this night. The boy watched his face and shivered at the man's eyes. He may not have known how close he was to death, but something predatory in the eyes of the man beside him made him grip his staff tighter and hunch his head into his shoulders. There were legends of lions that once roamed the edges of the desert, and the boy thought this man looked like one. Not his plain face, which was hard to remember in the growing darkness, but his dark eyes that seemed to absorb the night and stare at him like a demon. Brill held out a fist. The boy stared at it, unsure what to do. Brill demonstrated a fist bump with his other hand, popping the knuckles together lightly, and held out his hand again. The shepherd complied, holding up his fist just like Brill. The man bumped his fist and the boy grinned. They repeated the gesture again, and Brill moved past him and kept going down the path. The boy watched him go, one hand rubbing his tummy with a treat and water in it, the other still holding a fist that he used to wave at Brill's departing back. Chapter 7. He worked his way through the darkness parallel to the highway. Out here in the desert, the stars and gibbon moon lit up the landscape in a white ghostly glow, making it possible to travel quickly. There were no city lights along the roadway to blot out the stars, no electric glow from the city, turning the horizon an orange shade not normally found in nature. He moved at a fast pace, 8-minute miles that ate up the distance until he reached the edge of Idlib. It was where Aslan arranged for a meet with a contact of his own. Brill didn't like operating with unknown quantities, but there wasn't much to be done for it. Barak had zero intel inside the borders of the nation, and their contact Aslan did. He had to rely on the man's knowledge. With the distraction he provided to the rebel mountain group, Brill thought he could be trusted. If he wasn't using speed and stealth to strike fast and hard, Brill would have set up shop in an apartment and worked to gather additional intelligence. He would stand out in the neighborhood, but posing as a Canadian photojournalist to match his fake credentials could open a few doors to publicity-hungry Islamists who just wanted to share their story. Idlib was mostly dark, a few windows lit up on the horizon. He angled toward a darker part of the city, toward a street Aslan gave coordinates to find. South side of the village, 3 streets for the end of town. Look for the stone house with a green door. Someone would be waiting. No instructions to knock, no secret password or handshake. Just 2 men in a foreign country where he didn't speak the language, and they were known to behead journalists, giving him directions to save 2 lives. 3 if he counted his own. A dog barked as he approached the 3rd street. So much for the stealth approach. He found what looked like a green door on a stone house, but he couldn't be 100% confident. Green, black, and blue, any dark color really, looked the same until the sun came up. There were no front lights burning to indicate it was the right house. But it was a stone house on a row of stone houses on the short street, and the only one with a different door. That had to be significant. He took a chance and knocked. Shouting from behind the door carried down the street. Brill put his hand on his pistol and prepared for a fight. The door cracked open, and a young woman stared at him with sleepy eyes. Almost immediately, a hand slapped the back of her head and jerked her back behind the door. A man took her place, just out of his teens from the wispy mustache and beard that stained his face. He held the door halfway open to show one arm, the other hand gripping the edge of the frame while he yelled at the girl. He glanced at Brill and shouted at her again, the rapid-fire pace of words sputtering out in a guttural growl. He stopped talking and nodded at Brill. "You are the American." His accent was thick on the verge of undecipherable. "Canadian," said Brill. The man grunted. "Same thing." "Syrian Kurd Turk." Brill wiggled his hand back and forth. The frown on the contact's face popped into a grin. "I get it," he slurred. "Canadian." He held out his hand. Brill passed him an envelope from Aslan. He didn't bother to look inside, just placed it inside the house, and pulled the door shut as he stepped out into the street with Brill. "You know Aleppo?" he asked as he led Brill down the empty road. Brill shook his head. "The people you are looking for were at Aleppo." Brill remembered the city name from the map, and the report Barak provided indicated it was a hotbed of rebel activity and Syrian government response. Bombing runs were a nightly occurrence, and the groups were starting to wall off the city to outsiders. "Are they there now?" "Outside." He led Brill to a small building with one room. There were no doors. The windows were narrow slits designed to let in the breeze and keep out the sun. It was an empty shell, just debris from former occupants on a simple wooden table against one wall. No bed, no chairs, no signs of ever having held life except for the table and a plate and cup on it. His contact moved to one side of the table and reached into his jacket. Brill's hand snapped to his pistol. "It's okay," the contact said as he pulled out a map and tiny flashlight. "It's okay." Brill watched him spread the map on the table and highlight Aleppo with the narrow flashlight beam. "Aleppo is here," the man told him. "Journalists are here." He pointed to a spot on the map several kilometers outside of the city. "Is that confirmed?" "What does mean?" The man looked confused. "Are you certain they are located there?" "Yes," the man grinned. 100%. Confirmed as the word. Confirmed means yes. Confirmed then. Does it have a name? Is not a city. Is a house a wadi? Walled compound. Yes, walled. And guards. It will be very difficult for you to get to your friends. But I can help. For the right price. Yes, for good price. I can help you get in. Brill knew this was the shakedown. It happened in every third world country he had ever been in. The bribe was a cultural expectation, and negotiating for more was part of the DNA. "I'll manage," he told the man and got a shrug. "Okay then." The man rolled up the map around the flashlight and slipped it back into his pocket. Despite the weak light, it took a moment for their eyes to adjust to the darkness. Brill heard the man shuffle, and his silhouette blotted out the starlight in the doorway. Then he was gone. "Guess we're done," he muttered as he checked the exterior before following. It was 1 a.m. He still had time to make the compound and scope out the rescue. If he played it fast and loose, he could be back in Turkey before dawn. Chapter 8. It was easier to run on the road than in the hard-packed sand 10 yards off the asphalt, though it would be difficult to argue which was less technical. The asphalt was sun-baked and damaged, a series of cracked and crumbling surfaces covered by a fine layer of gritty sand. Off-road there were rocks and holes hidden in the sand, little fingers meant to reach up and snag a toe or punish the bottom of a foot. Since traffic was non-existent, the road made more sense. It also made for better time, and Brill settled into a 7-minute mile that he could hold comfortably for several hours. He knew it was an average, and he needed some gas in his tank when he reached the compound. He wasn't sure what to expect, but the cool desert wind, the silence of the night so different from the jungle he was used to hearing, lulled him into a cadence and the miles disappeared. The compound was easy to locate. It was the only structure between Idlib and Aleppo. He noticed the walls as black marks on the horizon that blocked out a portion of starlight in an unnaturally square pattern. That was his training kicking in, noticing when something didn't fit in. He approached the walls in a soft walk, listening for sounds of life as he made his way around the back of the structure. He relied on the late hour and his ears to pick up any guards before he reached them, as he slow-stepped the compound, one hand trailing on the stonework of the wall. There were enough niches he could climb it if needed, though he hadn't practiced climbing in some time. He made a note to put that on the workout list and kept going. A wooden back gate was closed to the night, the splintered surface covered in peeling paint. There were no windows, no other access points other than the front gate, which was blocked in a similar fashion. The rebels were stupid, he thought. 2 squads could take the compound in 5 minutes by smashing through the front gate and setting up a crossfire along the back road to catch the occupants as they peeled out of the back. Not a good sign. Dealing with stupid soldiers meant too much could go wrong, because their patterns were hard to predict. For all he knew, he could be walking into a nest of suicide bombers, all standing around in their vest waiting to blow themselves and the compound to hell. He wanted more intel. But the eastern horizon was beginning to turn dark purple, starlight winking out as the fringe of the sun scraped across the earth just below the sightline. He was out of time, and didn't want to hide in the desert to bake all day. Brill dug his fingers into a niche and worked his way up the wall. It was easy going at first, but the last 6 feet was worn smooth by years of desert wind carrying small grains of sand to abut against the surface, blasting away imperfections and smoothing out edges. He didn't want to go back down, so he searched, first with one hand then the next, while his toes began shaking under the strain. He found a narrow finger hold and grabbed it. If he could get his foot to the spot, it would be enough to reach the edge of the wall. Brill slipped his fingers along the surface back to the original position and slid his foot up toward the spot. He stretched to reach it, but the awkward angle put too much stress on his other leg. He needed to work on his flexibility, he thought, as he stared at what looked like the beginnings of his shadow on the wall. Still no time. He gripped the wall tighter and exhaled as he shoved off with his right leg and reached with his left. He had to use his stomach to lift the leg up, but he found the purchase and locked it in. His right leg dangled free as he relieved some of the pressure from first one hand then the next. He used his right foot to press against the wall and eased up to gain leverage, then shifted his weight to his left leg. This was the most dangerous part. He checked the traction of his fingers and right leg, took a deep breath and launched himself from those 3 points toward the top of the wall. He used his left leg to power up. The ledge crumbled under his toe in a scattering of plaster. But the fingers of his left hand gripped the edge of the top. He dangled by one hand and caught his breath, then reached up with the right hand and pulled himself to chin up the wall. It was a 2-story drop to the other side, and this section of the compound was hard-packed sand. A sprawling home spread out in the middle, 3 wings around a courtyard with a small well. There were other buildings scattered around the inside, perfect hiding places for kidnapped documentarians. The inside of the wall was smooth and bare on 2 sides, but 2 of the walls, the front and back, had ledges that ran the length and accessible by stairs that led down to the interior. Brill crawled on top of the wall, and though he could walk faster and minimize the shadow he threw on the ground, he scooted on all 4s to give himself time to recover from the climb. He reached the wooden timbers of the walkway and thudded inside the rebel compound. It was growing lighter each second, which meant he was running out of time. He jogged down the stairs and went to the closest building. It was empty. He hurried to 3 others with the same result. They were being held inside. Brill studied the 3 wings, each about 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, and tried to picture how it would be laid out inside. Without access to prints or even architectural knowledge of the area, he had no way of knowing what he was going to encounter. This trip had already identified 2 knowledge and training gaps he was going to have to fill when he got done, and it pissed him off. Shelby and Barack shouldn't have rushed the mission in their effort to conduct a favor so a senator would owe him. It put the mission at risk, it put Brill at risk, and that meant he might not be able to save the girl and her boyfriend. An image of an Angolan rebel with a gold tooth flashed through his head, and Brill felt a veil of rage well up inside him. He put one hand on the wall of the house and leaned against it, working on a quick breath exercise to regain control. Doubt needed to be erased, fear for others needed to be quelled. He breathed in for a 4 count, held for 4, and blew out for 4 to hold again for another count. He repeated it 3 times, and the rage subsided. It would never disappear, but he could control it, compact it into a tiny ball and bury it inside. Another 3 count, and he could think clearly. He was inside the rebel compound, on the verge of a rescue mission, and he had accomplished it in less than 18 hours. That was his specialty. That was the reason Barack sent him in. He was going to save 2 innocents and kill the bad men that took them, and it started with finding them. Brill pushed off the wall and resumed his search. He looked for a smoke-stained wall above a window or a chimney, which would have indicated a kitchen. The kitchen would have a door, and he could sneak inside from there. The problem he was facing, all he needed to do was a simple series of steps to complete each task and advance toward the goal. Get inside. Locate the couple. Get outside. Get clear. Then he could face what was coming next. He saw a darkened portion of the wall above a narrow window stained from years of smoke. It was next to a door at the top of 2 shallow steps. Brill tried the door, and it opened to a dark interior. He stepped through the doorway and closed it behind him, waiting for his eyes to adjust. Step 1 done. The room was almost pitch, a long, wide common kitchen with a stone stove built into the wall with a narrow window above it. Light slowly eased into the room to reveal the shadows of a plank table just below knee-height, and covered with bowls of fruit and decanters of water. If he had moved across the room in the dark, he would have tripped over the table and alerted the compound of his intrusion. As it was, the shadows were still difficult to make out details. He didn't see any sleeping forms on the floor, but that didn't mean there weren't there, lying against the walls. But he couldn't wait any longer. Dawn was here, and someone was going to wake up. Better they do it when he was leaving through one of the gates. Or never if they tried to stop him. He trailed his finger along the wall and worked his way around to the darkened doorway. It opened into the courtyard, revealing a series of doors along each of the 3 walls. He surmised each was a separate room with the courtyard serving as a hallway, and by the look of the fluttering tapestries that served as a transient roof, also as a communal gathering area. Brill crossed from the kitchen door to the first one next to it. He pulled his pistol, lifted the latch, and stepped inside. "Who is it?" a voice barked in the darkness in Arabic. A lamp flicked on to show a naked couple on a mat on the floor. The dark-skinned man shouted and lunged for an Alaska .47 rifle resting next to them. Brill leaped on top of him and straddled his chest, shoving his pistol under his chin. The woman squealed, and he clamped a hand across her mouth. "Quiet," he whispered. The man shifted, a warning he wasn't about to give up. Brill dug the pistol deeper, choking him. The woman lay her hand on the man's arm, grasping for his fingers in a terrified grip. "Speak English," Brill said in a hushed voice. A third item on his to-do list. Learn some key phrases in the language where he was going to be operating. The man gave a quick nod. "Where are they?" The rebel underneath him frowned. "The journalists?" Brill applied pressure with the gun. "Where are the Americans?" The man shook his head in confusion. "No Americans," he coughed. "It is just my family." He looked like he was telling the truth, but Brill knew that could be a lie. He removed his hand from the woman's face and switched the pistol into it. He wrapped his now freed fingers around the man's throat and squeezed as he shoved the pistol barrel into the woman's cheek. She whimpered and ducked away. "Where are they?" he asked again. The man looked up at him with moist eyes and pleaded. "No Americans are here. Only us." Brill studied them both. "Please," begged the man. Brill climbed up and moved away. He snatched the Kalashnikov, checked the magazine, and kept it aimed at the couple as the man wrapped his arms around her and held her close. "No Americans." "No, we do not know of these." "Did Ali send you?" Brill wasn't sure if that was his contact, but nodded. "Ali owes my family money," the man explained in stilted English. "When I tried to collect, he said he would send a man here to end the debt." The hitman grunted. "Ali wanted to use him." "Are you here to kill us?" the man continued. "Please spare my family. Kill only me." The woman wailed. Perhaps she understood English more than she let on. No matter, thought Brill. He wasn't going to kill anyone. At least not in the compound. But Ali's little vendetta cost him time, which the girl and her boyfriend didn't have. Brill lowered the barrel of the rifle. "I'm not going to kill you," he said. "But I am going to borrow your car." Chapter 9. The car turned out to be a dust-covered bucket of rust that had been a Mercedes in a previous life. Where the paint still showed through, it was the color of sand, and the Nazi swastika on the steering wheel emblem told Brill it was a relic from a war gone by. He pressed the ignition button, and the diesel engine roared to life with a throaty, reliable rumble. He was pleasantly surprised by how well it handled as the car made the return trip to Idlib with zero problems. He pressed the accelerator deeper than he would have normally liked in such an antique, but the time was far shorter than it took for him to reach the compound just a few hours before. Brill located the green door and parked the car on the street in front of it. He stood to one side as he knocked. The screaming started again before the third rap fell. The same dark-eyed girl opened the door. She had just a moment for her eyes to pop wide when a hand slapped on top of her head and jerked her back out of sight. Allie leaned around the edge, still yelling at her. "Hello, Allie." The man's eyes doubled in size, and he had just enough time to sputter a yelp before Brill reached in and yanked him out into the street. A single shoe spun off of his foot and skittered across the rough stone pavement. Brill shoved his head against the rear passenger panel. It crumpled with a resounding crunch. Allie wailed. The hitman double-checked the street and door to make sure no one was sneaking up on them. He pulled his pistol and stuck it in Allie's nose. The man's wail trailed off to a whimper. "You set me up." No, the Syrian started to sputter. Brill clicked the safety off. "Okay, yes, okay," Allie whined. "I did okay." "I don't care why," said Brill. "Just tell me where the girl is." "Aleppo," Allie blurted. "They never move." "So you sent me on a personal vendetta." "I beg you," Allie sobbed. Brill leaned back so he wouldn't get blowback on his clothes. Movement caught his eye. The girl knelt next to the wall, crying in silence as she watched. He took 2 steps to the side to get an angle on the door in case some brave soon-to-be-dead person decided to rush to Allie's aid, but it was just the girl and her quiet tears. "Who is your fan club?" Allie stopped whimpering and shouted, waving the girl toward the door and the relative safety of the house. She didn't budge. "My sister," he cried. "She should not be out without a veil." The rest was lost in a string of Arabic which she ignored like a practiced pro. "Don't let her watch you kill me," said Allie. "She should not see this." Damn it, thought Brill. That was the second Syrian to make a noble gesture for their family member in the last hour. For a population that suffered piece-of-shit terrorist groups to exist in their borders and kidnap do-gooder documentary crews, it was an admirable trait. "Where in Aleppo?" he sighed. Allie mumbled out an address. Brill repeated it in his head and jerked the dazed man out of the gutter. "Anyone there owe you money?" Allie shook his head no. "If I come back here, I'm killing everybody," said Brill. Your sister." The dog 3 streets away barked. "The dog. Nobody here gets out alive if you're lying to me." Allie's head bobbed out a yes. Brill dropped him next to his sister. He pointed the pistol at one, then the other to get their attention. "Nobody," he said. Brill jumped back into the car and backed out of the street. He had to get to Aleppo before Allie recovered his bravery and called to warn them. Chapter 10. The address in Aleppo led Brill to a house. Somehow he thought Allie would give him the location of the rebel camp, but either the man didn't know it, or worse, he was over his fear and had warned them. It was that thought whirring through his head as he watched a man exit the house and march up the street. As discreetly as a light-skinned Westerner could be, Brill followed at a distance in the car. He almost abandoned it when the man he was following turned into a crowded bazaar. He searched for a place to pull over and leave the car when he saw the man standing in the bed of a pickup truck full of others exit the crowded marketplace. Brill jammed the accelerator to chase them. A Peugeot crunched into his rear bumper. Brill leaned out of the driver's side window and surveyed the damage. The driver of the car jumped out screaming and ran for Brill. He grabbed him by the front of his shirt and yanked him nose to nose, his acerbic Arabic spraying spittle on the hitman's face. A click shut him up. Brill pressed the tip of the pistol into the driver's chest and eased him back. The man released his shirt and gently smoothed the wrinkles where his hands had been. "Glad we had this talk," Brill grunted. He slammed the gas again and took off with a shrill shriek of tearing metal after his prey. The truck full of robed men ground down one street and nearly spilled all of them out of the back as it took a curve too tight and popped the rear wheel over a curb. Brill could hear the yelling through his open window. He was glad for the distraction. While Aleppo was one of the larger cities near the mountains that separated the small country from Turkey, it had nearly zero traffic, which made the Mercedes conspicuous. Add to that the fact that it was being driven by a white man, and he was really surprised the truck occupants weren't paying attention to him. He attributed it to dumb luck, dust on the windshield, and the cheap mirrored aviator sunglasses he borrowed from the glove box. The truck continued for 3 blocks and pulled into an arched gate. The turn was unexpected, so all Brill could do was continue driving past and hope for luck. It stuck. None of the men shut the gate, and he didn't see any weapons as they huddled beside the truck. That didn't mean they weren't there, just that the men didn't have them in hand. He needed a longer look beyond what the 2-second drive-by provided. There was a crumbling building up the street. Brill pulled into the rubble-filled driveway and felt around in the back seat. He pulled up a duffel bag full of sweaty clothes, a robe and turban. Dumb luck, he muttered and wrapped the turban around his head. He threw the robe around his shoulders and worked the configuration into something that would pass as presentable. If anyone looked too closely, they would see the cargo shorts, hiking boots, and loose shirt under the robe, but if anyone was studying him that closely, he was in trouble. He tucked the pistol into his waistband and checked to make sure he could clear the weapon fast if he needed. He strutted down the street as if he owned it, because people often took a strong, purposeful walk as proof someone belonged. The studying back at the camp in Langley was paying off. The strut could also do a lot to dissuade curiosity. People in these neighborhoods were experts in the art of not noticing. Hell, he thought. That's probably true the world over. Any of his neighbors growing up would be hard-pressed to remember him, and those that might would never have guessed that the quiet, abused kid would grow up to be a hitman for hire. People just didn't pay attention, which gave a unique advantage to the few that did. He spied through the still open gate from the corner of his eye as he passed by and did a quick head count. There were 8 of them in a small group, talking with 4 more off to one side by a fire pit. 4 walls, 1 door, 2 windows that he could see on the only building inside the walls. That's where the hostages would be. Locked up and out of sight. He was going to have to play this fast, loose, and a little on the wild side. A style he liked. Brill crossed over the street and hustled back to the car. He cranked the engine, pulled a U-turn, and slammed the hammer down. The short 100 yards or so wasn't enough time to build up speed, and cranking the wheel to hang it tight right into the yard shed even more momentum. But the solid ton of German metal was strong enough to plow through the group like a scythe. Bodies flew and crunched as the men screamed. Brill cut the wheel and slid sideways toward the door of the house, spraying up a fine cloud of dust. He jumped from the car, drew his pistol, and ran through the door. Ambient light leaked through one window to show an empty room with a doorway leading to the second. Brill planted his back to the wall and ducked down to peek around the frame. A frail-looking, tear-stained face with Iowa blue eyes and corn silk hair stared back at him. "American?" he asked. She nodded and clinched the bony arm of the man next to her. "Move, move," Brill ordered, and held out his hand to her. She grabbed it with zero hesitation and held fast to the man as Brill rushed them both toward the door. "Wait," he held them up and spied outside. Moans and wails of prayer filled the courtyard as the dust settled. The 4 men from the fire pit roamed among the broken bodies by the truck, offering aid. "Let's go," Brill hissed and shoved them toward the car. Chapter 11. He shoved them both in through the driver's side of the car and leaped in after them. It was a mad scramble to rearrange limbs so he could kick the gas pedal and spin the wheel, shooting up a screen of sand and scree and aiming for the hole in the wall to escape. He heard a body bounce off the fender, and the scream that followed before making it through the hole and out into the empty street. "Thank you," the girl sobbed. "What's your name?" Brill shouted over the wind roaring through the open window. "Amanda." "Don't thank me till we're in Turkey, Amanda." He jerked the wheel and slid around a corner. Brill raced for the edge of town. There was a main highway that drove to the north, but he wanted to avoid it. The rutted single-lane, hard-packed sand roads that cut through the desert were tougher on the car, but it was an almost straight shot to the foothills that led up into the mountains and the path back to Turkey. "We can't go back," she tugged on his sleeve. "Not yet." Brill glanced at her out of the corner of his eye and jerked left to avoid a man stepping into the road. He got a yell and a finger gesture he didn't recognize, but recovered enough to whip around the next turn and the open way beyond. "Do you have a dinner invite I need to know about?" he cracked. "Our tapes," she said. "We need to get the proof." "My job is to get you out of here," he told her. "Both of you." He nodded through the windshield. "The border is 30 minutes that way, and there's nothing to stop us." "But we need those tapes," she begged. The flatbed truck tore across the desert in front of them, shooting up a cloud of dust as the rebels searched for the Mercedes. Brill yanked them into an alley and slowed to a crawl. He wondered if the rebels had seen them on the street. If so, they would be coming, and AKs versus his Taurus was not a fair fight. He needed to get better weapons, or get free of the Mercedes, and still make the crossing to the safety of the mountains. "Stop, please," Amanda shouted. Brill stood on the brakes and slid to a gravelly stop. "We risked our lives to tell what was happening here." She put both hands on his arm. "The longer we stay here, the bigger the risk," Brill explained. "I know that. We know that. We always knew this was a dangerous project. But someone has to know. The president is using chemical weapons against the people. Women, children," she trailed off. "It's all on the tapes," the man finally spoke up. Her boyfriend, Rain, a scarecrow of a man with sunken eyes and a shock of black hair over an unkempt beard. Brill had seen that look before on men after battle, and the horrors they experienced. "First, are you all right?" he asked Amanda. "I'm fine," she nodded. "Did they hurt you?" "Just threats. It was going to get worse, but they hadn't started yet." "We haven't eaten in days," said Rain. "Barely enough water. They threatened to burn us, to make me watch while they raped her, but just some punches and kicks so far." "Good," thought Brill, as if being starved and beaten was a light form of torture. He knew it wasn't, but it helped him damp down the rage that boiled in his stomach. Amanda was safe, the girl and her boyfriend in his car. He could complete the mission and get them home. If they would cooperate. "The flat where we were staying is on the way," she tried a new tactic. "We could grab our gear, and you could take us wherever you need to take us. That will buy us some time too, right?" She saw the truck full of rebels in the desert before he hid them in the alley. She was right, they could use a little time while he came up with a plan. And he didn't like sitting here just waiting to be found. If the rebels started doing drive-bys, the streets were empty enough that it would be easy to find them. Better to keep moving. Brill nodded. "We do what I say," he instructed. "I'll take a look at the flat, and if it's dodgy, we're chucking it all and lighting out for the hills." "Got it." Amanda and Rain bobbed their heads in agreement. "They could be watching your place to see if you go back," he warned them. "It might not be so easy to get away next time." Amanda grabbed his hand. "Thank you," she told him. "But if you kept driving for the mountains, they would have cut us off. They're better armed than you are. It would have been suicide." So she was one of the observant ones, he thought, as he dropped the car in gear and eased toward the end of the alley. She paid attention. Good. He hoped she would give that much attention to him if he said run. Chapter 12. They were waiting at the flat. Amanda directed him toward the far edge of town, to a 4-story block building with a faded stone exterior. He parked the car several hundred yards away and got out, still in his light disguise, to try and blend in. The streets were getting more crowded with pedestrians, but not so many as he might have thought. The girl said a lot of people were escaping to refugee camps, opting to live in squalor instead of fear of being bombed. Brill knew a thing or three about refugee camps. They were breeding grounds for disease, disillusionment, and discontent, which made recruiting for rebel groups and terrorist organizations easy. The lack of routine and access to basic needs, including education, created a generation of people who were looking for someone to blame for their misfortune. Some blamed the government of their own country, usually corrupt. Some blamed corporations with ties to the West. Some even blamed America and the myths and legends of gold in the streets made possible by the American dream. It was a no-win situation for a population, no matter their religion, and anyone with the sense to look up history would know that since the dawn of war, man has created displaced people. In the past, they were made slaves or indentured servants. In the 20th century, they were placed in ghettos and camps, kept confined and hidden, until some outrage or another drew attention to the situation. Then Western countries would open up their borders for immigration and move the population to new urban centers where it was a different kind of refugee camp. Paris had one, New York, Detroit, Minnesota, South Africa. They were all over the place. If the citizens of Aleppo were emigrating to a refugee camp, that meant things were pretty bad here. It showed. The 4-story building was the tallest on the block and the only one left standing. Burned-out shells dotted other lots, the stonework pockmarked with bullet holes and shell fragments. Rubble blocked alleyways and side streets. There were no vendors, no markets or bazaars in this part of town. 4th floor, Amanda had told him. He rounded the corner and spied the spy fairly easily. 2 guys sitting on the doorstep leading into the building cradled Alaska 47 rifles. A token guard, he thought, just in case they came back. Since Brill hadn't used his gun at the compound to rescue the couple, they must have assumed he wasn't military, so they didn't need superior firepower. He ducked into a doorway and watched for several minutes. The 2 men didn't move from the spot, engaged in quiet conversation with each other. Brill marveled that it was the first time he hadn't seen people scream to communicate with each other in a while. It almost made him smile. He was pretty confident there was no one in the flat, just the 2 guys on the door. He meandered back to the car and slipped out of the robe. "Put this on," he told Rain. The skinny man shrugged into the robe. "They'll notice my head," he said. "Stay here," Brill told Amanda. "Hide in the back seat." She hunched down in the floorboard, trying to be as small as possible. A woman in a car alone was a big target, especially without a cover or veil. Brill planned to make a 5-minute run up to the flat and back. "We're in and out," he told Rain as the scarecrow struggled to keep up. "You get it and get out." "They're going to notice my head," he worried. "Let me take care of that," said Brill. They rounded the corner, and Brill positioned Rain in front of him as they walked. The tall man tried to duck his head. "Head high, walk proud," Brill whispered from his back. "That's what they'll notice." The tall man drew himself up to his full height. Brill came to his shoulder. The robes fluttered in the breeze his legs created as he strolled toward the men at the doorway. The 2 of them stopped talking and watched him approach. They were focused on his uncovered head, muttering to each other as he drew closer. Brill stepped around him, and their confusion grew. Why was a man wearing a turban and no robe, and one with a robe and no turban? Brill walked right up to them and cracked his pistol across the first one's head. He dropped. The second tried to scramble for his gun. Brill kicked him in the groin, then knocked him out with the butt of his weapon. Rain gaped. "Move," said Brill. He grabbed the bodies, one in each hand, and dragged them into the narrow stairwell. He slung a rifle over one shoulder, checked the magazine on the other, and held it ready. The 2 unconscious rebels' boots stuck out of the doorway, but that couldn't be helped. Hopefully they wouldn't be there long enough for anyone to notice and investigate. Brill followed Rain up the stairs. On the 4th floor, Rain nodded toward a door. Brill motioned him back as he silently stepped across the hallway and tried the knob. It twisted, and he shoved the door open while staying behind the frame. No one called out. Brill peeked around the edge into the empty room. "Grab it." Rain rushed past him and into the living area. It was a mess of disarrayed furniture and debris, like a fight had occurred. Brill supposed it had if Rain and Amanda had put up any resistance when they were captured. Rain went to a small alcove in the wall, pulled out 2 gear bags and shouldered them. "Need to check?" "Good idea," said the thin man, and he checked the bags for their camera equipment and tapes. It was all there. Brill wondered why the rebels didn't take it and use it or sell it. It looked like quality gear, and the black market extended everywhere. Or they could have begun their own propaganda studio, using the equipment. But they left it here. Either bad leadership or drones doing scut work. Drones with assault rifles could kill just as easily as an expert, though, he thought. He had encountered enough uneducated boys in Africa who were good enough at pulling the trigger that he lost some good mates along the way. He listened for footsteps in the stairwell and gave an all clear to Rain. They descended the stairs 2 at a time and made the street. The 2 bodies were still laid out unmoving. Brill shouldered the rifles, so they were less obvious as they scurried back to the car. It was empty. "God damn it," Brill growled as he searched the street. Did the rebels double back and find her? There were no signs of struggle at the car, no drag marks in the sand. He got a rifle ready. "Stay here while I find her," he told Rain. Amanda walked around the corner with a shawl and a veil. "I'm here," she called. Brill and Rain jogged to her. "Are you okay?" Rain checked her over. "Why did you get out?" Brill grunted. "We needed transportation." She pointed behind her to a tiny Fiat. "They'll be looking for that." Brill snorted. She was sharp. And thinking ahead, which he chastised himself for not doing. Amanda was right. The rebels would be on the lookout for the damaged Mercedes, but they might overlook a tiny car. He chalked it up to being too worried about the trip to the flat. The mission was almost complete. He made it in country. He retrieved the package. The hardest part was still to come, but they were close to the border and now hidden in plain sight. They just might make it. Chapter 13. They didn't make it. The ancient Fiat was newer than the Mercedes, but the Italian design just wasn't cut out for desert driving. Brill tried to avoid the potholes and ruts that dotted the sand-washed roadway, but the impossible task was made even tougher by the three of them crammed into the two-seater car. The axle gave out 2 miles from the refuge of the mountains. "We're hoofing it." Brill climbed out of the car, feeling like a clown at a circus. Amanda put her hands on the roof and hauled herself out beside him. "How far?" "Couple of miles to the path," he said. "Then we wait for dark and cross at night." "Can we make it?" Brill studied the landscape behind them. There were a couple of dust trails that could be vehicles in the wavy shimmering of the heat-filled air, but the way behind them was clear. "We're going to make it," he told her. They still had miles to cover, but with no direct pursuit he felt good about their chances. Besides, after he had been rescued from precariously similar circumstances, all he wanted was a little reassurance. He could give the same to the girl and her friend. Rain doubled up on the gear bags. "Does she have to wear that out here?" He indicated the shawl and veil covering Amanda's head and shoulders. "Pack it in," said Brill. He planned keep the turban and use it to block the sun. Amanda had the same idea, and wrapped the veil around her head like a pirate's bandana. She passed the shawl to Rain so he could use it. Brill set a fast pace across the desert, cradling one of the rifles with the other slung across his back. He kept watch on the dust trails in their rear, eyes constantly searching in front and behind them for any threats. Being out in the open in daylight left him feeling exposed, but 3 people marching shot up a hell of a lot less dust than the Fiat. He hoped they were blending in. Rain passed out. 1 minute he was marching with them, the next Brill heard a thud and glanced back. "Rain." Amanda rushed to him and checked his pulse. Brill knelt beside them. "We haven't eaten," she told him. Brill grunted in anger at himself. Of course the man passed out. He'd been at least 3 days without food, beaten, and now without thinking, Brill had force-marched him through desert heat. That Amanda was still standing gave him a little thrill of respect. She was as tough on the brain pan as she was resourceful. Brill pulled a water bottle out of one of the pockets of his coat, the last of his supply from the trip in. "I cached supplies on the other side of the mountain," he told her. "See if this helps." She started to lift Rain's head and dribble it into his mouth. "You first," said Brill. "I can't carry you both." She looked at him unsure for a few moments, and then saw the reason in his argument. She may be mentally tough, but the strain and lack of resources was taking its toll on her as well. She felt like she was moving in a fog. He watched her tilt the bottle and take 3 small swallows, trying to conserve it for the man down. "Half," said Brill. She took a couple more gulps, measuring after each to make sure she only took half. She showed the bottle to Brill. He took it from her, lifted Rain's head and dropped it in his mouth drip by slow drip. Natural reflex took over, and Rain swallowed it all. He still didn't come around, though. "I'm going to have to carry him," said Brill. "Can you haul a gear bag?" She nodded and stood with an outstretched hand to take the bag. She started to sway, but Brill caught her arm and held her upright. "Sorry," she gasped. Lightheaded. Brill cursed himself again for foregoing the protein bars and extra water bottles that were a few miles across the mountain range, hidden in a gorge. He should have known they might need them. And now with the 2 of them incapacitated, it would slow them down even more. I can't carry you both, he said. I can walk, she assured him. It was just the blood rushing back. I'm okay. He didn't let go of her arm. I can make it. We're not far, right? A couple of miles. I can do a couple of miles, she offered a weak smile. Maybe a few more than that. Mental toughness is one of those things that can't be measured until it's observed. Brill had seen tough-looking men go down crying like babies when lack of sleep and deprivation broke down their barriers. He had run a few ultra-marathon races where grown-ups laid down on the side of the trail and sobbed until they were dry heaving. Part of recce training had been building mental fortitude, and Brill used meditation and endurance training to keep it sharp. He respected it in others, and this woman was showing a level that made his admiration double. He slung the bags over each shoulder so the straps crossed his chest and they rested on each hip. He respected Rain, too, because the bags were heavy, and the Scarecrow Man had hauled them both without voicing a word of complaint. Brill settled him across his shoulders in a fireman's carry, adjusted so that everything sat right, and he still had access to a rifle. Amanda took the other rifle since she couldn't carry a bag, and they set off for the safety of the mountains. Chapter 14. They almost made it. Brill held up under the weight of the man and gear for the next mile and started up into the foothills. It was more difficult to watch their back, and when he finally turned around, the two dust trails from the distance were converging on them. He looked up the trail. They still had several thousand yards to move uphill, and even then they would need to find a hiding place until darkness fell. Whatever was making those dust clouds would be on them before then. He estimated they had less than 10 minutes. They were out of time. Stop, he said, and laid the Scarecrow out on the ground. Amanda stumbled to a halt. Pick him up, she gasped. We have to keep moving. No time, he nodded. She turned around and finally noticed the signs of pursuit. They could make out tiny images now, 2 trucks full of an indistinct number of bodies. She whimpered. God damn it, thought Brill. They almost made it. Now it was a hard choice. He was going to have to leave Rain behind and move her up in the mountains if they were going to stand a chance of making it. He just had to convince her first. Amanda, he started. No, she said in a firm, strong voice. We are not leaving him behind. She was sharp. He shook his head. She knew how the odds were stacked and knew she was the primary objective. Her cameraman was collateral damage and could be jettisoned to save her. My job is you, Brill said, and took a step toward her. She drifted the barrel of the rifle toward him, not aiming at him, but enough in his direction to make him pause. Your job is to get both of us out of here. Not in the contract. He took another step. She dropped to both knees beside Rain. You're wasting time, she told him. Take him further up. I'll hold them off until you get him hidden, and then I'll follow. You can come back and get me. We can't, said Brill softly. They didn't have time to debate. The trucks were less than 5 minutes out. Enough time for the two of them to make it up the hill and slip away in a gorge maybe. It would still come to a firefight, but he was confident that with the right cover, he could convince the rebels that chasing them was too costly. She sobbed, grabbed Rain by the shirt and struggled to lift him over her shoulder. I'll do it, she cried. Cover me. She made it to her feet and several steps uphill before she fell, the weight too much for her in her starved state. Brill respected the effort. Please, she sobbed softly, her tear-choked voice reaching back into his memories. She sounded like Lorette, and the way she begged Brill to save her from the rebels that kidnapped them both. He clamped down on that memory like a bear trap as red blossomed behind his eyes, and the eternal rage he kept bottled up boiled over. He would kill the rebels, kill them all, just to save this girl. 2 quick breaths brought a semblance of control, and he grabbed Rain again. Move, he said, and Amanda flinched from his stare. Your eyes, she said, but he ignored her as he double-timed up the hill. She fell in behind him, no complaints, no excuses, just the sound of labored breathing as she fought to keep up. They made it to a ridge with a shallow gorge that cut through the ground like a gash. It was only 20 yards long, but close to the top of the hill that led to the next mountain. Here, she called out. Brill stopped and turned around, breathing heavy. I can't keep up, she told him. I'll hold them off from here. Get him someplace safe and find me. That's a dumb idea, he told her. A bullet shot up a geyser of ground next to her, and she rolled into the gorge and brought her rifle to bear. "Get him safe," she shouted. "Come get me." She aimed the rifle and pulled the trigger. Nothing happened. Brill marched over to her and flicked off the safety. "Conserve your ammunition," he told her. "Keep them down there. I'll be back in 5 minutes." Below them, the two trucks met and the rebels spilled out of the back. They sent scattered shots up the hillside into the ground. Amanda fired, hitting the windshield of the truck, and caused the men to scatter. They ducked behind the vehicles for protection and sent random fire back. Brill jogged as fast as he could, stumble further up the hill. He made the next rise and round another gorge that led further up and in. It was a good place to hide somebody. He dropped rein and the gear under the edge of an escarpment, made sure the man was propped up, and double-timed it back to Amanda. The rebels were bravely making their way up the hill. If they were smart, they would lay down suppressing crossfire and rush her position. But her shots had scared them, or they were less organized than rabble. Brill slid down into the gorge beside her and began firing. It was a slaughter. He held the high ground and had cover while the rebel group was exposed on the hillside. He was a trained sharpshooter, a sniper unparalleled, and even with an unfamiliar and unreliable short-range weapon like the Kalashnikov, there was no contest. He dropped 8 rebels in the span of 10 seconds before the others scurried down the hillside and back to their trucks. 4 more fell in the chaos of dust and screams and shouting as the trucks backed away. When they turned around, he hit 2 more men with headshots before they were out of range. Amanda gave him a satisfied pat on the arm. "That'll do, pig," she sighed. "That'll do." He quirked up an eyebrow at her, but she shoved herself off the ground and began moving uphill. "Take me to my boyfriend," she said. Brill checked the magazine on his weapon. He had 2 shots left, plus hers and his pistol. If the rebels came back in force before nightfall, he was going to have to think of something else to fight with. There were plenty of rocks on the hillside. Maybe he could make a sling, he pondered, as he pushed himself to catch up with the girl. Chapter 15. He didn't need a sling. There would be no waiting for dark. Brill and Amanda slipped down into the gorge where Rain was hidden and found him surrounded by a group of robed men with AKs. Brill did a quick calculation in his head and practiced the sweep in his mind's eye. If he were alone, he had enough bullets to take them all down. He could drop 2 with a rifle, drift left as he panned right with a pistol, and take out the rest. They would return fire, but his speed and aggression would slow them down enough that he could get most of them before the rest thought their next step through. In a firefight at this close range, seconds counted. But seconds were all he needed. Their return fire would hit Amanda since she was next to him. He could knock her down, but that would take time, maybe a second or 2 that would count against him. They might hit Rain too, and if both of his rescues were killed, then the mission would have been worthless. A waste of time. The men stared at him as he did the calculations, unaware just how close they were to dying, and Brill raised his hands. The shouting was muted this time, as if the men themselves were afraid of being overheard, that voices might carry in the mountains. But they aimed their rifles at Brill and Amanda and screamed in a language he didn't know. He regretted raising his hands. It was a sign of weakness, a sign of surrender, and Brill knew he wasn't going to surrender. Never to rebels, never to anyone ever again. He dropped his right shoulder and prepared to grab his pistol. His mind never stopped working on the angles, and he took 2 steps away from Amanda, which earned him more shouts and more rifles aimed at him. At him and not her. He smiled, and thought the men shrank back just a little when they saw his eyes. Brill readied the draw and played it out in his head again. A little boy's voice broke through the noise. The goat herder stepped out from the back of the group, his shrill voice cutting through the others. The Kalashnikov looked too big in his little hands, but the other men reacted to him with deference. He smiled at Brill and walked toward him, chattering excitedly. The men let him. "You understand this?" Brill held his left hand higher than his right, still ready to go for his weapon. "He's the chief's son," Amanda grinned through tears. "And he says you're his friend." Brill dropped his hands and smiled back at the boy, earning just a slight flinch. The men shifted nervously behind the goat herder. The boy came over and held up his fist. Brill bumped it. The boy clapped Brill on the arm and back. "He's explaining to them that you gave him food and water, comfort on a night when he was late," Amanda said. "Custom dictates you are their guest. Did you plan this? Dumb luck, Brill told her. The men shouldered their weapons and lifted up rein. They grabbed the gear bags and led the small group toward the far side of the mountains. Epilogue. The man was using chemical weapons on his people. He had scientists like that one from Africa that Brill had killed, making weapons of mass destruction. There was no honor in killing, he knew that much. But at least a bullet was discriminate when fired from the right person. Chemicals and bombs were indiscriminate, and the effect it had was to kill mostly women and children. This Syrian president was targeting women and children in an effort to terrorize rebels and rebel sympathizers. Brill knew that terrorists should be stopped, and the best way to end any terrorist activity was to remove the perpetrator from this earth. It was the best solution for a lot of reasons, the least of which was Brill himself. He was very good at killing people. He had thought about it often on downtime from missions with Iraqis before and in training with Iraq private contractors most recently. There were men who were trained to soldier, and some of them were trained to kill. They were efficient, skilled labor. It was different for him. He was not only skilled, he was an artisan. Maybe it was because he considered himself dead inside, strapped on a table and gone with the girl he loved at the hands of rebel forces. Maybe it was something he had always had, this deadness and lack of empathy. He didn't remember being a psychopath growing up. He didn't torture animals or pull the wings off flies. But he did struggle in social situations and preferred solitude over the company of others. A head shrinker at Iraq told him once he was a high-functioning sociopath, that if the elimination of another human was the most expedient path to solve a problem, he could do it and not give it a second thought. I could have told you that, he thought, as she explained it to him. He didn't think it was from lack of caring, though. He did care, and perhaps he cared too much. He cared that there were bad men in the world who bullied and oppressed the people around them, that politicians and corporations killed and maimed without thought to the consequences for their actions. These bad men did worse things, and no one stood up for the people. No one could stop them. A world court had been established so that atrocities couldn't occur, yet Pol Pot happened. The genocides in Africa occurred on such a regular basis, it was like the annual wildebeest stampede across the Serengeti. In South America, in North Korea, on every continent, bad men were allowed to get away with murder without fear of the consequences of their action. Brill hated it. He hated that the UN was a powerless organization, that The Hague was toothless, that the US would do nothing except impose sanctions and rattle their saber, all the while innocent people died. Children died. He watched the presidential palace for a week and noted a pattern. After all, it's what he was trained to do. A maid left a window open on the second floor in the hallway. It was pushed out 3 inches, probably to air out a privy, he supposed. Once he located the window, he noted the president walking past it on a regular basis. That's all he needed. He leaned past the billowing curtain and sighted down the scope of the barrel. It was over 1,000 yards away, and he adjusted for wind and the drop of the bullet as gravity would impact the trajectory. It had taken him a week to find the right room posing as a backpacking photojournalist, and another day to steal a car to drive to the desert and retrieve the rifle he'd cached there. He snuck it into the room under the cover of darkness, prepaid for 2 more days in cash, and laid in with supplies to wait. Then he watched. Over the narrow sight of the scope, he learned every inch of the window that observation showed him. He waited past the first day, just to be sure the routine was set. It was. On the second day, he pulled the trigger.